in first affirmative. However, in this case, they have not done that. By offering the observations in terms of providing a new system which could deal with the problem, the first negative agrees with the affirmative and tells you that we should have space industrialization. Specifically, in terms of not knowing, his first subpoint, talking about the large space colonies. We are not, first of all, space colonization. Secondly, you need space industrialization to get ready for that so that the massive costs that he does talk about can actually be decreased. And only through space industrialization can you get those potential benefits. Secondly, his B subpoint, he assumes that Rockwell and therefore NASA are going to be illogical in terms of their studies. I would argue two things. Number one, these people have to make a good choice. To the extent that they continually are dealing with the government, they would want to increase their credibility with the government and provide the accurate information. Secondly, if this were true, they should be able to bring up counter-studies to deny all of the advantages we give you. They have not done that yet this round. On a C subpoint, the fact that you do not know. I would argue three things about cost-benefit analysis. The first of which is that it is blind to higher goals. Charles Sheffield tells us that a rational series of long-range priorities for the United States program cannot be established using only cost-benefit or any other accounting method. Cost-benefit analysis is usually blind to higher goals. With that approach, no one would ever marry or have children. Secondly, I would argue that in the past, NASA using that has eliminated the vigorous program that we are looking for. Charles Sheffield again. When the benefits are inestimable, cost-benefit methods are much inferior to the judgment of intelligent men and women. Sometimes the techniques are used to avoid going out on the line with the personal decision. More often, they emasculate the authority of the men and women who run the United States program. Finally, I would argue that if you use cost-benefit analysis over 100 years ago, you would have thought that Alaska would have been worthless because you did not know the potential benefits that exist. Does not deny the fact that we should have it. On D, he tells you that we do not know. Clearly, we tell you what the benefits are. His second observation, that they are useless. He first of all, on weather patterns, talks about on his weather patterns, that we do not know how we would be able to use that advantage. I would argue, number one, the reason that we do and are able to predict what the runoff would be is so that the dams will be able to let the water go away quick enough so that there is no flooding. On B, the natural disasters. Number one, these people should simply take cover in the hills. In terms of its other impact, the other impact is going to be essentially only something that would be for the affirmative and give you more rationale to vote for us. On his third observation, I would say three things to it in total. Number one, we should get prepared if the aliens are coming for two reasons. Little a, we need the technology so that they don't think we are an inferior, mindless race. But I would argue little b, maybe we can protect ourselves if they are not beneficial. Finally, I would argue three, there is no proof anywhere that there are aliens or that they would indeed be unkind to us if they were to come. On our inherency, we tell you, first of all, that their returns are too long in the future, and they talk about a transporter system. I would argue two things. One, this is simply ridiculous to think you'd be able to move people around with such a transporter. That is clearly not the affirmative plan. We only talk about realistic things that can be adopted. But I would argue, too, the airliners have no motive whatsoever, because to provide that transporter would eliminate all the fine stewardesses that I'm sure that we can tell you about after the round. And two, the joint ventures being illegal. He says that the government wouldn't do that. I would argue, number one, there is no reason for government rationality. Look at all the laws that they have in terms of trying to prevent minors from all of the benefits that they could have of the wonders of such things as drugs and such things as being able to go out and drive a car. The government is not necessarily rational, but I would argue, secondly, that government won't do that, or that because government goes out and does that does not mean that much sense in terms of denying what we are telling you. Just because there are laws, eliminating those laws is only the position that the affirmative gives you in this round. On three, the NASA. One, we are talking about a threefold decrease, and he didn't deny any of that. But two, in terms of the shuttle right now, we tell you that that's an insufficient amount in terms of gaining our advantages, and none of that is ever denied. The advantages that we gain specifically on the employment. First of all, we tell you that there is a large amount of unemployment right now. He says there is an economic boom, yet we tell you that that is not true, and we provided the evidence to substantiate it. Secondly, he tells you that these people do not want jobs. I would argue, first of all, there are a significant number of people who used to be employed for NASA who no longer are. Dr. Lowe in February 76. Total employment on NASA programs will decline from over 400,000 at the peak of the Apollo program down to 120,000 by the end of fiscal year 77. I would argue, number two, actually, the measure of unemployment that we give does not include discouraged workers. From the need to disaggregate the full employment goal, January 78. If we added the official count of both the unemployed and the labor force, those reported as not looking for work and therefore out of the labor force because they think there are no jobs available, the effect is to increase the national unemployment rate during the year shown by varying amounts between 0.7 and 1 percentage point. Kevin in first negative constructive told you it was 5.9%. Actually, you can add another million people to that, and the 4.8 million jobs that we give clearly is a superior policy than letting those people remain unemployed. On the weather advantage, he says he deals with it above, but he does not deny any of the advantage. We have the fact that we can reduce the flood damage by half, and that is also not denied. In terms of the medical care, he says, number one, that we can train doctors. This is simply not as advantageous as training the paramedics that we provide. On the Citizen Band radio, number one, Kevin in Cross-X shows you that the Citizen Band will not be as productive, but I would argue, too, the computer system we give provides a significant number of advantages. In terms of being able to predict shortages of drugs, by being able to predict that, we can save thousands of lives. From Rockwell International 78. Development of entirely new processes for production of insulin saved thousands of lives, and by expanding supply to satisfy foreseen demand, we can save those lives. Overall, a significant reason for adopting space industrialization exists, and the first negative has agreed.
On the reasons you say the government doesn't act rationally, you give the examples of drugs and driving. So it's the position of the affirmative team that the federal government doesn't always act rationally.
Correct. That's why we always would need change.
All right. Now, up on the top, I argue that NASA, a branch of the federal government, and a private corporation that stands to benefit might have a reason to be overly optimistic. But you say, no, of course they would want to increase their credibility, and there's no reason why they would be irrational in making this decision.
Is this a question?
Yeah. Why is there a difference?
The difference between...
What's the difference between the rationality of the irrationality of the federal government and the rationality of NASA?
The fact would be that in providing an agency outside of the federal government and one that deals with studying a specific problem, you do not have the same as you would with the law that Congress has passed.
How does NASA get all their money? Don't they get it because they ask the government to pay for programs?
They have their requests for Congress every year, yeah.
And don't they explain to Congress why they like the money? So they have to justify to Congress the spending of the money, right?
True, and we're saying that spending is not enough.
That's quite enough. Now, you read a piece of evidence that says that actually the unemployment level is 1.5 or 5.9%.
That was in first affirmative.
Who do they count as unemployed?
I believe they call 50,000 household heads and ask them.
They just call these people up on the telephone and ask them. And what do they ask them?
Are there any people in your household who are unemployed?
Okay. Now, do these people say yes if their 6-year-old kid doesn't have a job?
No.
Or do they say yes if they don't have a job?
They say yes if it is if it is an adult.
How does the government control for people lying in these statistics?
They don't. In fact, I showed you that it was inaccurate because it's actually a percentage point higher.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll talk about that. In terms of the computer system, why do we need to have computers up in space tell us why, where all the drugs is, as opposed to computers on the ground?
Because you don't have computers on the ground right now, and only through space industrialization can you get
We don't have computers on the ground?
Not to measure who needs what drugs in terms of...
So it's just a matter of directing where the computers do it, right?
A change within the status quo, yeah.
Everybody knows how the computers do it. In terms of the argument on ice packs and stuff...
The snow melt.
Yeah, the snow melt. Are the people who look at the mountains so stupid that they can't see the snow is up there and is melting?
Well, they can't measure how fast it's melting, and they can't measure how much
Now,
is there.
how does a satellite measure how fast it's melting?
I specifically don't know the technology they use.
Well, okay, if they see that the water is getting up higher, why don't they just open the dam?
That's what our plan would do.
I know, but why can't they do it without the affirmative plan? It seems to me when these guys see
They
the
don't
water
know.
level coming up a little bit, they'd say, okay, we better lift the dam a little bit.
When the water starts coming up, it's too late. And yes, they do lift them up all the way when there's a flood now.
Well, how long does it take, before they know it's going to be a flood?
How long? I really don't know. I know that it can be done with our plan.
Okay.